Part of the Express Rail Link's West Kowloon Station now under mainland jurisdiction. Japan hit by the strongest typhoon in 25 years. And in Brazil, public outrage after a fire destroyed a 200-year-old museum.
Hello, good evening and welcome to TVB News. Part of the Express Rail Link's West Kowloon Station came under mainland jurisdiction today. This as the Guangzhou-Shenzhen-Hong Kong Express Rail Link co-location ordinance went into effect at midnight last night. And Chief Executive Carrie Lam confirmed there's an additional level at the train terminus, something that was not made public until today. This is as open and transparent as the administration got. A few photos and press releases issued in the early morning hours after the co-location ordinance came into effect at midnight. It shows local and mainland officials hosting a ceremony to mark the commissioning of the mainland port area, a part of Hong Kong now under mainland jurisdiction. No press were invited to the event.
And unfortunately, anything relating to the high-speed train normally is presented with some worries and anxieties, and I don't want this to continue to repeat itself.
While the chief executive confirmed media reports of a previously unannounced B5 level below the train platforms, she simply compared it to the back-of-house area one would find in hotels. The MTR Corporation said that level is reserved for maintenance staff and can be used as an emergency fire escape route. Still, that has alarmed legislators who have long remained sceptical of the joint checkpoint arrangement.
I understand that no legislators have learned about it in the past, but then, the chief executive said it is just a kind of normal arrangement. Then why this level is not mentioned ever, is not ever mentioned in any documents?
She is still concerned about the number of staff in the mainland port area, which covers at least 3 of 6 levels at West Kowloon Station, and the fact that mainland officers will stay overnight, something the government had said won't happen.
These mainland officials, they will not leave the mainland port area, okay? They come in on a daily basis from Shenzhen to work in the mainland port area, and they are not allowed to go out to have their lunch or dinner. So we need to find arrangements to provide meals to them.
She stressed the costs of meals and utilities such as electricity are fully paid by mainland authorities. Although the Guangzhou-Shenzhen-Hong Kong Express Rail Link enters service on the 23rd of this month, an opening ceremony will take place the day before.
Well, the chief executive also today commented on university student leaders talking about Hong Kong independence during inauguration ceremonies for undergraduates. She called it an unhealthy trend. Sharon Tang tells us more.
An inauguration ceremony for undergraduates is supposed to be a joyous occasion, said Chief Executive Carrie Lam. She condemned individual student leaders who took advantage of the occasion to make speeches that are untrue and unreasonable. Lam's remarks were apparently in response to what was said by student union presidents during ceremonies held at the Education University and the Chinese University. Both student leaders expressed support for Hong Kong independence. Lam said their expressions were in breach of the Basic Law and would impact the city's prosperity and stability under the one country, two systems arrangement. In addition, she also said they would mislead people into thinking that all local university students share the same political sentiment. Still, Chinese University student leader Au Chek-hei said he was only proposing independence as one of the political options for Hong Kong. Meanwhile, at Hong Kong Baptist University's inauguration ceremony for undergraduates this afternoon, the acting president of the Students' Union only highlighted the spirit to defend and to challenge in his speech. However, he disagrees with what the chief executive brought up this morning.
It's quite ridiculous since talking about Hong Kong independence or some Hong Kong political issue should be included in the freedom of speech.
The university's vice-chancellor did not take any questions from the media. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
Typhoon Chebi is currently ripping its way through Japan, where 1 million people were ordered to evacuate to safety. Hundreds of flights out of Kansai International Airport have been cancelled as Chebi made landfall along Japan's west-central coast today. High seas poured into the airport, flooding one of its 2 runways, cargo storage and other facilities. Chebi, whose name means swallow in Korean, was briefly a super typhoon. In nearby Osaka Bay, strong winds sent a 2,591-ton oil tanker slamming into the side of a bridge. Thankfully, the tanker is empty. Experts are calling it the strongest typhoon to make landfall in Japan in 25 years. Argentina's president have announced new taxes on exports and deep cuts in spending in an emergency bid to balance the budget. The move comes as his centre-right government hopes to persuade the International Monetary Fund to accelerate a $50 billion loan. Alan Buckner reports.
The austerity measures were prompted by a 16% slide in the peso last week, which brought its losses against the US dollar to 50% on the year. The peso dropped another 4% after the announcement. Argentine President Mauricio Macri said the far-reaching measures are needed after decades of financial turmoil. He said this is not just a crisis, it has to be the last. It marks a step backwards for Macri, a free market advocate who slashed rural taxes when he took office in 2015. He vowed to normalize the economy after years of heavy state intervention under his predecessor, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. The main target of the new tax is the farm sector, the biggest engine of Argentina's economy. Argentina is the world's largest shipper of soy meal and soy oil, third largest exporter of soybeans and corn. But the new taxes could delay international shipments as farmers and export companies monitor the exchange rate. Argentina's finance minister Nicolas Duchovny forecast a balanced budget next year and a primary surplus of 1% of GDP in 2020. The government also said it will bolster social programs such as child welfare, reduce the number of ministries from 19 to 10, and slash capital spending by 27%. Investors have sought determined action to close the budget gap, as this year's recession and sliding currency would leave the country struggling to service its debt, which is mainly in US dollars. Duchovny will now head to Washington for talks this week with IMF officials about speeding up disbursements of a $50 billion loan agreed to in June. Alan Buckner, TVB News.
Residents of Rio de Janeiro angrily protested after learning thousands of years of history are gone after Brazil's National Museum went up in flames. Sonia Artero reports critics blame the government for financial neglect.
Scuffles between police and protesters outside the National Museum. Fuming, mad employees and residents tried pushing their way in to survey the fire damage. Police had to use pepper spray, tear gas, and batons to hold back those demanding to know why such an important building wasn't fireproof. Federal police are already working to determine what could have triggered a fire that destroyed the country's 200-year-old museum Sunday night. All that remains standing is its pastel yellow facade. The interior is completely gutted and its entire roof is gone.
Me parece fundamental.
Brazil's culture minister suspects the blaze was caused by either an electrical short circuit or a homemade paper hot air balloon that likely landed on the roof. The National Museum was founded in 1818, and it held Latin America's largest collection of historical and scientific artifacts. The most devastating loss is its landmark collection of Egyptian artifacts and the oldest human fossil found in Brazil. Another staggering loss is the bones of an extinct group of flying reptiles known as the pterosaurs, which first appeared on Earth 225 million years ago. They are closely related to both dinosaurs and birds.
Juntamente, o Ministério da Educação
The education minister said with $3.6 billion the country will restore the structure and rebuild its collection. But this descendant of a Portuguese-Brazilian royal family complained the museum's collection can never be replaced due to the government's financial neglect. He said the museum didn't even have a sprinkler system because the government couldn't be bothered to pay for one. This museum curator sifted through ashes to save what's left of the meteorite exhibit. Brazilian President Michel Temer said the destruction of the building, where emperors once lived, is a loss that can never be calculated. Sonia Artero, TVB News.
President Xi Jinping met with African leaders for a second day today at the China-Africa Forum in Beijing. Officials say this year's summit will strengthen Africa's role in Xi's Belt and Road initiative to link China by sea and land with Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and Africa. Yesterday, Xi pledged $60 billion in financial support for Africa. It will be provided in the form of government assistance, as well as investment and financing by financial institutions and companies.
There are growing calls for the release of two Reuters journalists jailed for 7 years in Myanmar for breaching a law on state secrets. The two journalists were investigating the killings of Rohingya Muslims by security forces. They claim the secret documents that led to their convictions were planted on them by police. 76 Myanmar civil groups called for their release. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, denounced their jailing as a travesty of justice, saying it breached international standards. She said it sends a message to journalists in Myanmar that they have to self-censor or risk prosecution. Dutch prosecutors said there was a terrorist motive behind a stabbing of two Americans in Amsterdam last week. The man identified as Javed S. stabbed the pair at the city's central station. He was later shot and wounded by police. The 19-year-old Afghan with residency in Germany said he carried out the attacks because of repeated Islamic insults from Geert Wilders. The Dutch lawmaker has been critical of Islam in the past. The attacker and the two victims remain in hospital. And still ahead. A man sentenced to jail for shaking his baby daughter, leaving her in a vegetative state. And the corruption case against a former top official and a tycoon to be transferred to the district court.
Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has been, who once compared himself favorably to Adolf Hitler, paid a solemn visit to Israel's National Holocaust Memorial. Standing alongside his daughter, he kindled the eternal flame in the Hall of Remembrance and laid a wreath. He also said what happened should never happen again. 2 years ago, Duterte said his anti-drug campaign was like the Jewish Holocaust, and he would be happy to slaughter 3 million addicts. He later apologized for the remarks. Today, he labeled Hitler insane. Duterte is paying an official 4-day visit to Israel, the first by a Philippines president. He's in the country to secure tourism, labor, and defense deals. Back here in Hong Kong, a father who shook his baby daughter and left her brain damaged was today sentenced to more than 6 years in jail. Almost 2 years since the abuse, the girl remains in a vegetative state. More details from Haley Joe.
Chung Ge-yun today paid a price for assaulting his daughter in a case a High Court judge described as extremely serious. The 26-year-old defendant earlier admitted to aggressively shaking and slapping his newborn daughter 3 times to stop her from crying. The baby wasn't even a month old when this happened in December 2016. He went on to threaten his mother-in-law with a knife when she asked about the daughter's condition. Judge Anthea Pang rejected the defendant's claim of fatigue and stress from overnight shifts. She said parents should control their emotions and protect their children. The judge also said what the father did is no different from taking the girl's life. She was left partially blind and is still on life support at hospital. Pinching the baby's face when she was no longer responsive shows the defendant's frequent use of force. The judge did not agree with the defense that the man treasures his daughter. Chung Kae-yoon was sentenced to 8 years in prison for each of the 3 child abuse charges against him. The sentences are to be served concurrently, plus another 11 weeks for criminal intimidation. After a guilty plea, the overall jail time was reduced to 6 years and 4.5 months. Haley Zhou, TVB News.
The corruption case against former government official Wilson Fung and tycoon Chang Eun-ok will be transferred to the district court. Fung, formerly Deputy Secretary for Economic Development and Labour, faces 2 charges: misconduct in public office and accepting an advantage. He was in charge of allocating air traffic rights when he allegedly pocketed $510,000 from Chan. She was director of 3 air traffic companies when the alleged bribery took place 14 years ago. No pleas were taken today, and both were released on bail pending their next hearing at the district court in 2 weeks. And that's the news.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.